has to be 750 square feet. Well, we all know that people are buying condominiums that are 500 square feet, all right? And do we need 1.5 cars per parking spots? You allowed Aberdeen and Dundurn, a very large condo project, to go up and you waived the requirement for what, 10 condos or 10 cars. So in trying to legalize a fourplex, and if the landlord only has 3 parking spots, of which maybe the tenants only have 2 cars, that's where the committee would have to be flexible and view all the facts, you know.
And Mr. Chair, I think the point I'm making is that there still needs to be, you can't just automatically legalize these units. There has to be a process that enables the community, the neighbors,
absolutely,
to take a look at those legalization. Sure, and I was hearing, let's just grandfather them, and I'm going, whoa, wait a minute.
All right, that's it. Maybe it might grandfathering, but
agreeing
that, you know, the safety is the first, is the number one. The safety is number one. The second is the zoning. It has to be compatible. It has to be complementary to the neighborhood as well. It has to work, you know, within the confines of the neighborhood as well.
Excellent.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, motion please. Councillor Farr, Councillor Collins, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you, Aki.
Thank you.
Seeing that we have no further residents, so I think we should move a motion just to close the consultation, although it wasn't an actual public hearing. Moved by Collins, seconded by Whitehead. All those in favor? Thank you. At this point, you would be asking questions of staff or going directly to your recommendation. I think I do have at least 2 councillors that had questions of staff, so I'll go to Councillor Farr and Collins, and then we'll come back.
Well, it's been a number of hours, Mr. Chairman, so I'll first go through you to Marty Hazel just to recap where we're at with today's recommendations versus where we'll be down the road. Just a quick recap for everybody. Thank you.
Mr. Hazel?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, City Council approved project compliance to help us assess some of the actual living conditions out there. We did update the planning committee a number of times. We tried to come back every 4 or 5 months with updates. And a result of those updates, the committee asked us to bring back a licensing model, a hybrid model of licensing enforcement, which we brought back for you today. It was our intent to just bring this back for direction, if we were on the right track or not, and to come back later in the year with a model, outline on all the detail, and it would be a publicly advertised meeting so that people could speak to the actual detail when we got there. So we have a lot more work to do, and we were just looking for direction on whether we were on the right track before we do all that work.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Marty, a model, or the possibility exists here today that we could ask you to do a number of things, several models?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, we're looking for some direction on principle. It's been suggested by some that continued proactive enforcement is the answer, and certainly that is an option. However, part of the problem with proactive enforcement is that the cost would be on the levy. If you have a licensing model, licensing costs could help defer all or some of the costs. And again, a licensing model, a license would help us to get entry into some of the properties. Proactive compliance would simply be going out there looking for violations, and any revenue coming in to offset the cost of levy would simply be realized through fines.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you hit on it a bit, but I'd like you to expand because we did hear it a number of times today. Licensing would help you gain entry onto properties. Can you just resubmit for the record exactly what licensing will help you achieve that without licensing you're unable to achieve now in terms of those investigations?
Mr. Hazel?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Right now our entry into inside of rental properties is really on cooperation from the tenant, if they would like to let us in or not. As Glenn said, we're getting a little bit better at it, but that's through technique, not through any legislation. A license would still allow a person to refuse us entry. We would have to take reasonable steps to gain entry to a unit, failing which, if we could not do that, then we could use the license and refuse that if we were not comfortable issuing a license because we didn't do any inspections.
Okay. And finally, the last delegate had made a few comments, which I think probably concerned a number of us around the table and over across the chambers here, saying that in the last year there was a case where there was no notices to comply. Inferencing intimidation, I guess. There was widows and seniors intimidated was the comment by the delegate. I think it only fair to allow staff the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to respond to the allegations. And inform us as to whether or not there's anything to it.
Thank you. Mr. Hazel or...
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I'll let Glenn speak to some of the detail. Those situations have been brought to our attention before. We have tried to address them, and we have been successful in court, but I'll let Glenn speak to the detail.
Okay. Mr. Wyde?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct, that we had early discussions where some of these issues were brought forward, that maybe the officers were being aggressive. I've looked at that, and I went back to staff. In fact, we had a meeting with the mayor. I went back to staff, talked to them about approaching people and being careful as how they go into an entry. We have business cards typed up with under the Planning Act, you have the right to refuse me entry, but that's explained verbally on every entry that we go into. I'm telling them that they got to be more conciliatory, less officious, and you gain entry a lot better that way, which is actually working out that way. They have the right to refuse. They can absolutely say, no, I don't want you here. And if that's the situation, then we can't force our way in. We have to leave and recoup and make a decision which way we're going to go next. We sometimes get landlords telling their tenants not to answer any questions or don't open any doors. Well, that's an easy fix. If I can't get in, and that's the type of situation I'm running into, I'll get a search warrant or a Planning Act and return with staff and gain entry that way. But the comment about someone being fearful, I can't answer to that, but when a person is charged and they go to court, they have the right to speak with the prosecutor. They can enter into discussions. They could have a lawyer or an agent there to represent themselves. They have an opportunity to speak there and then, and that's where a lot of the decisions are made with the prosecutors. So I'm sorry to hear that somebody was fearful because they're from a third world country. That's unfortunate, but I believe the officers are doing the best that they currently can.
Thank you, Glenn. And thank you, Marty. Those are all my questions.
Councillor Collins, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and through you to, first question would be from maybe to Marty or Glenn, and it's regarding the property standards bylaw. I thought we heard a number of comments in terms of the city's proactive enforcement certainly has been met with some criticism from some parts of the community, and one of the accusations is that our bylaw was outdated, and I seem to recall we've had a couple of discussions around the committee table to update that bylaw over the last number of years. So could you refresh our memory in terms of when we last updated our property standards bylaw?
Mr. Hazel, please.
Through Mr. Chairman, as you know, there was a major overhaul of the municipal law enforcement section beginning in 2007. We've been bringing a number of bylaws back to you to be updated because they haven't been done for years. The property standards bylaw was last updated in 2010.
Okay. And in regards to the, when I was in the market for a new home, not too long ago, I'm looking at many of the MLS listings. Some of them are openly sold. They're advertised as income properties, I think is the term most commonly used. 4-unit detached dwelling, X amount per month in terms of income, and separate meters, and description goes on and on. Are we monitoring that? And so I think Augie was, and others mentioned that, for many years this was something that seems to be accepted by the municipality. Do we look at those advertisements, and does that raise any flags for us to say that's something we might want to look at in terms of either zoning or other issues that might come up?
Glenn, please.
Mr. Chairman.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we monitor MLS listings. We go on Kijiji. We go on McMaster University off-site campus housing. We go on Mohawk College off-site campus housing. We go looking for rental sign units posted in front windows where we know it's a single-family dwelling, and we approach them. Yes, we are being more diligent in identifying and rooting out these illegal properties in the city.
Okay. And my last question would be, Mr. Chairman, through you, maybe this is a better question for planning. And it's in regards to Hamilton's process as it relates to other municipalities. In terms of our fees, I think there's a consistent message from both the agents and landlords in that it is a very onerous and cumbersome and costly process to go through to legalize some of these units. and obviously there's no guarantees with the process. There are, whether it's council or committee of adjustment, there's obviously some subjectivity as it relates to the decisions that are made. But in terms of our process, are we any different than anyone else, than other municipalities, comparator municipalities in regards to process? And in regards to fees, could you comment on how we compare in that regard as well?
Thank you. Mr. Mallard, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. You'll recall a couple of years ago we'd had a fees review done. We're in the process of doing that again this year, and we'll be bringing forward a comprehensive report and recommendation later this year. But at that time, you had us look at comparator municipalities with respect to our fees, and in most cases we were in line or at the lower end of the fees for other municipalities. So I wouldn't say our fees are onerous with respect to our comparators. In terms of process, typically when we're dealing with illegal conversions and someone wants to go from 2 to 4 units, that's essentially adding a use. So typically we don't support those through the Committee of Adjustment. We do have council direction that where committee approves something that has the effect of adding a use, that we are to repeal that and bring a report to committee, and we follow that process. So that's where we're at. We typically would deal with them as a minor zoning application. That's about half the normal fee. The reason being, in those cases, they're probably just adding the use. If there are other zoning modifications required, it could get bumped up to the full fee because we're into a comprehensive review. So it depends on the extent of the revisions that are being required and requested. So.
Thank you. Mr. Gabe, would like to comment?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it's funny because I was just looking at the draft of the service profiles of the service delivery review that's going to be presented to GIC in next month. And looking at the planning things, so the consultant at KPMG, I looked at all our comparators, and I'm reading here in terms of the development approvals that the operating cost per development application is much lower than some of its comparators. Hamilton also has a significant lower percentage of applications appealed to the OMB than most of its peers. Legislative Services meets Planning Act timeframes, 30 days for minor variances, 120 for zoning. Hamilton had the second highest percentage of development approvals meeting Planning Act timeframes of all reporting OMB jurisdictions. So yes, we're on par, Councillor Collins, through you, Mr. Chair. And yes, it's the same process, and yes, it's the same Planning Act, and I think we're doing a good job and continue to try to improve.
And one of the most common requests that we've received through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure how many councillors, I know Councillor Whitehead and McCaddy, and there were a couple others that attended the convention center meeting where we had a number of landlords and realtors attend, and I know it came up again, as I mentioned earlier, through the Economic Summit, and then it's come up here today in terms of process. What's the downside of saying, as of a certain date, all of these properties that have illegal units will be grandfathered under the current zoning bylaw? A, is that possible? And B, I guess, what are the pros and cons of pursuing such an endeavor? It is probably one of the most common requests we've received through this consultation process.
Well, it'd be fairly, through you, Mr. Chair, it'd be fairly unusual to do that. I mean, you're legalizing things that you don't know what the implications are. So, do they have enough parking? You're legalizing all that, setbacks. I think the building code or the fire code may stand on its own. But you're basically saying anything that's existing today is now illegal. I think the much more prudent approach, Mr. Chair, is once the new urban OP is approved next year, we're going to be changing the new residential zoning. So we're going to be working with landlords, working with property owners, working with neighborhoods, and working with provincial policy to start legalizing these things when we know what the impacts are and what the implications are. So we will be allowing for more multiple residential units throughout the city as part of the new comprehensive zoning. And the other thing, the keys to the home, it's pretty well mandatory in our official plan that this council has approved that we're allowing second dwelling units in every single family home across this entire city. So that hasn't been fully implemented, although Paul tells me the old Hamilton bylaw permits it today. So, we're going to assist with this from a planning point of view over time, and I would highly recommend we not do any grandfathering of of things that might just create a nightmare